Mother David, Adonai Roy Lo Axor, Benasteshi Abitene, Amen Lucas in Adelaide. Son of David, God is my shepherd, shall not lack. Lush meadows he lays me down, beside tranquil waters he leads me. Nafshi is Shove, Yadcheni b'maglei tzedek l'ma'an shemot, Gam yelech b'get salmo v'asdoni v'roh, Yatoti modi. Shittecha b'shanta, Chachim v'yinachamuni. Restores my soul. Lead me in the path of justice for his name's sake. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil because you are with me. Your rod and your staff together both serve to comfort me. Tara Mafane Shulcha Neked Saroi, Ishanta Bashem Roshi Kosi Levoya. Prepare a table for me in full view of my torment years. United my head with oil, my cup overflowing. October Ches the only goodness and kindness concealable the days of my life, that it will dwell in the house of the Almighty for eternity of days. Gathered to take final leave, Richard Hartman, Uday Ben Brian. Being that today is the day following the holiday, because generally eulogies are kept to a minimum on many means, because the person that he left deserving of a proper eulogy. Quite to the contrary, a person generally speaking marred with the joy of the community at large. The assumption is that a person would want them marred, would want them out. An opportunity of knowing Richard to some extent, through the son, through Dale, Chalet, different family events also. Been out of town now for 14 years in Florida. But the image that I have, the family speaks about how much family meant to him, dedication to his family, dedication to his parents early on, dedication to his family, to his wife, late wife, to his children, to his grandchildren, and recently his great-grandchildren. Living here in Cleveland, opportunity of being close to the children, the Dale children, and moving down to Florida, being close to his family, close to his daughter, Orlando, closer to his son and their families also. There was that sense there was nothing that was as important to him as family. Grew up here in Cleveland also. Some of comical speaking to Dale, whenever names come up, it's, oh yeah, we're related to them. The Hartman family seems to be related to so many people in that town. But having his brothers also, Alan and Sheldon, and their families, even leaving Cleveland 14 years ago was not something which was easy for him. Taking leave of the family that he left behind. Son's words, Roy's words, there was even going to Florida gave him somewhat of a new lease on life. So his wife passed away a few years later. Again, that said that he seemed to thrive living with his family over there. It's coming on the heels of the holiday of Sukkot. Sukkot is referred to as Chag Asif, the holiday of the ingathering. Gathering everything, then the first, agriculturally speaking, when they brought the produce from the harvest, brought it in. There was that sense of joy. The joy came with joy of plenty. They were comparable to the American idea of a Thanksgiving. It struck me that the terminology the Torah employs oftentimes regarding a person in this world, also that same expression of ingathering. We are safe Olamot, gathered to his nation, as it were. It struck me life in some ways is like that too. We live an entire life planting seeds, growing, and harvesting. And that the final part of life, the final stage of life, that ingathering, being able to look around and able to see the fruits of one's labor through the course of a lifetime. Not only in family obviously has most prominently, family, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. But for that same, along the same lines also, the fruits of labor, the person's accomplishments in the course of life, people that it might have touched during the course of a lifetime. Therein lies that sense of joy. That sense of joy of the holidays. I mean, my partner is also, like you might have mentioned, religions are kept them in to some extent because it's a moment of being able to appreciate the fruits of one labor at this moment of the gathering. Return back those beloved life. So if that parents, family members who are no longer here for that matter, that opportunity of being able to take stock of accomplishments during the course of a lifetime. Being able to recall that a little bit. People that are here, of course, it's difficult to hold a private service, but going through a difficult, challenging time we are right now. Reflection, the impact, the richer the impact, what's the life of our lifetime. Children would like to say something also, words of remembrance of their father.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Dale, for making sure we have them in. Thank you, Rabbi, for that. It's part of me that I have come up to my health condition, and that's why I've been off the pod under the promise of my son that we would be every night be careful, especially since Brian, Alex, and Jason are moving in with us for a little while. It's important. Trying to be cautious. My father was a simple man, but in many respects a great born into depression. He was very frugal because of it. Grew up in a time that was very difficult, and he kind of passed that along to my brother, my sister. In many respects, maybe well, because I didn't ask too much from him or my mom, and I worked my way through school, and I made a promise to myself that I would take care of my kids. The work I could do to take care of them. But it's all about feel that faster than probably has been. So I appreciate that. And when he was able to retire finally, and he lost jobs during the years, for us, we got yearly, have some time that he could enjoy. For instance, with my brother's kids, and my brothers, because they were the only ones in the family left in the cooking side, all the aunts and uncles, the cousins. There came a day he just couldn't do it anymore. It was very hard on him. He didn't want to leave his grandchildren, although he had grandchildren elsewhere. It was a very difficult decision. And we helped him make it. I realized when I cleaned out his basement that he kept every single snow tire he ever had. And I had lifted every single one of them up the stairs to get rid of them. He kept 40 years in National Geographic magazine. And the picture was year of boxes. He able to kept here, but he carried them all up. And after anyone else did it all. That's what I did. And then he was able to come to Florida, like the rabbi said, and started to be somebody. Got to be able to more of his grandchildren, so it was so hard to take the one that was here. And, you know, almost 10 years ago now, we were here for my mom. One of the biggest prized possessions was a picture that we took of my father, his 9 grandchildren. One of them was Mary Lawn. There was 10 of them in that picture. He kept that picture. We flew it over him. Kept that picture. And every day he looked at it. And he got great grandchildren. He added a picture to the corner. And that was one of the biggest prizes. But he wanted more because more people where he lived had great grandchildren. He kept on complaining that he was the only one without a great grandchild. So since he knew Johnson was married, and Lauren married to Lauren, he kept on bugging him. When are you going to have kids? They weren't ready. I don't blame them. So Brian volunteered. He said, Grandpa, I know 2 or 3 women in Florida. I can get you 2 or 3 grandchildren anytime you want. And he was petrified. Brian actually meant it. Well, Brian did, because eventually he did marry a girl from New York, Alice. He gave him his own great-grandson. And while he got to meet Jordana, Jonathan's older daughter in person, at Julie's wedding, he got to spend video time with his other 2 great-grandchildren. He was just born this year during COVID that Debbie and I didn't get to see until later on. And I remember every time he was looking at that phone or that camera, he couldn't get his eyes off of it. He just stared intently. And he's so proud that he was a great-grandfather finally. And he had a hat that we got. World's greatest great-grandpa hat, something like that. And one day he had to get rushed to the hospital because he was choking on food. They lost the hat. And that was the thing that he was most upset about. Not that he almost died, not that he had to be in the hospital, but they lost his hat. And we got him a new hat. He buried with his hat, along with his included in his hat. Some of you may not know, he saw the Indians win the World Series. He was a beer vendor in 1948. And he saw them win. For that, I'm jealous. Because I don't know about it, but he taught us that family was very important. And no matter what, family's important. And everything can work its way out if family's healthy and alive. And we hung on. 10 years, over 10 years without my mom. Hung on. And the last conversation I had with him was, boy, I can't sleep. I just can't sleep at night. I'm up all night and fall asleep at 10 o'clock in the morning, and then these damn nurses come in and wake me up. And I wish I could just sleep. Oh, God, it's wish. He died peacefully in his sleep. He didn't wake up. He wasn't sick. He died peacefully, and no one doesn't see his body. They look peaceful. Now he's not our mom. And I make sure, so I bought the flowers, that he's taking them with her, with them, giving them to my mom. Her favorite flower, yellow. Sunnydale, February.
What I have to say is fairly similar to what my brother said. He said, he's the same father. And the word that comes to mind when I think of my father is revenge. And literally,
Imagine this human being that means much more because he has the qualities, the good qualities of human being. He had his weaknesses, he had his strengths. And more than anything else, he cared about his children, his compassion. He thought very carefully before making any decisions about his children or his grandchildren, and he always had them in mind. For instance, if one of us needed something, the first thing he thought of was, well, how much they would need. And the second thing he thought of was, how will that affect everybody else before making a decision? And like my brother said, family was incredibly important to him. And he worked hard. He you know, he did Smith and Sang because he was a very frugal person. But all this money was for his family, for his children. And I remember these issues, and he tried to like be there for each of our different things. And it was unique. I think it was very unique in that respect because he treated each of us individually. And he did different, like my brother talked about learning responsibility. Some of us needed more of certain things than others, and he was there for that. Okay? And he had an understanding that at the time I didn't understand he had regarding the needs of his children and his wife. One of the things about my father was he was a very quiet person. He really didn't say much. He didn't have, it wasn't that he was shy, it wasn't that he was, unfriendly. He just didn't really have a lot to say. And one of the things with this coronavirus and the quarantine he had down in Florida was he had more time on his hands, more time on his hands, and he was lonely. And one of the things that he did was he talked much more on the phone. And even though, it was a bad time like that, the lesson was I got to know him really well. We talked on the phone all the time, like for hours. And it's never been like that before. He'd call. He never called. He always wait for you to call him. He'd call and he'd talk for hours and hours and hours. He'd say he's got to go. And he'd call back. He'd say, sorry, I had to go. And I learned so much about my father since March because of that. I'm truly thankful that we were able to do that. And like I said, I've never met anybody who was more family oriented. I'm truly blessed to experience that. That's really all I have.
Daughter Ellen, to say a few words.
I came very prepared. And this is as much as I could cut it down, so bear with me. When I think about my dad, I see our relationship in 3 stages. First, my childhood relationship as the youngest daughter of 3, growing up in Mayfield Heights. Second, my adult relationship as his daughter living in Cincinnati, raising 4 of his grandchildren, all 2 years apart. Yes, Dave and I were a bit crazy. And third, my adult relationship as his caregiver daughter in Florida. So let's start at the beginning. Growing up on Chelmsford Road as the baby and the only girl. Well, let's be honest. I was the most spoiled. There was a pretty big age difference with Roy 7 years older and Dale 5 years older. So I had my mom and dad all to myself for a great deal of my childhood. And in those years, as most of you know, my dad was quiet. He was a very quiet, reserved type. except when yelling at the TV during Browns and Indians games. My dad was extremely hardworking as a mechanical engineer, always trying to make ends meet. He never missed a school function like my choir concerts and plays. He didn't talk much about himself back then. When he got laid off from jobs, he kept things quiet and he didn't want us to worry. I have vivid memories of shopping sprees with my mom and dad. At times, I couldn't decide between two outfits. My dad didn't want to disappoint me, and he'd simply say, "Why don't you just get both?" He would say that I looked good in a gunny sack. And actually, one time I tried on an outfit with them, and the brand name was just that, gunny sacks. My parents used to love telling that story. A few things I will always remember. My dad smoking a cigar and later a pipe before giving that up 20 years ago. 4th of July family gatherings with my dad grilling out and us watching the fireworks in the front yard. I'll remember trips to Washington, D.C., Dearborn, the Poconos, and yes, Disney World. Just the three of us. I was my dad's little girl, his princess, and he would do anything in his power to make me happy in his quiet way. Fast forward now to the 90s. I graduated from college and grad school, followed Dave to California, moved back to Cincinnati, and then started popping out those adorable grandkids. And so began my second relationship as his adult daughter. The 90s were a blur. From 92 to 98, I gave my parents 4 more grandchildren, Julie, Jake, Jessica, and Jill. My mom's health, as you all know, wasn't the best, which was a huge stress for my dad, but we made the most of their grandparent time. They were always there when another little hooligan was born, and even stayed to help for weeks at a time. They attended every birthday party, Thanksgiving dinner, and made it to many sports events as possible. The grandkids, even in their adulthood, who affectionately referred to Grandpa as Grandpappy Jr., Grandpapa, and Gramps, loved to get him all riled up. A few moments that stick out to me when Grandpa said, "Shut that door, Sammy." And oi, remember, Grandpa says oi. Although the shenanigans literally drove him crazy, he loved his grandchildren so much. In 2000, Dave took a job at Disney and we moved to Orlando. It was really rough being so far away from my mom and dad. And I'm very thankful to Dale for taking care of him for all those years in Cleveland when I wasn't here. But after 6 years of road tripping to Cleveland, my parents made the big move to Orlando. They sold the Chelmsford Roadhouse, including his growing supply of laundry detergent in the basement, because my dad could never pass up a bargain. And mom and dad ditched the cold weather for the sunshine state. And so began the third and final relationship with my dad, as his daughter, the caregiver. Life was easier in Orlando. My parents didn't have to cook, clean, or do yard work. It was also a time where my dad really came out of his shell. After my mom passed away in July 2010, he missed her terribly. It wasn't until a year ago that he finally let us donate her clothes. He hardly expressed his feelings of loneliness, but once in a while he did, especially on car rides from our house back to his place. Some of his favorite things to do was watch old movies and read every single book by his favorite author, James Patterson. He also took suggestions from his grandkids like Harry Potter and the Hunger Games. He had dinner with us once a week, usually on Sunday night. He was a fixture in his Indian's hat, and later his world's greatest great-grandpa hat. At the girls' softball games, and soccer games and Jake's concerts and baseball games. And so as the years went by and the kids' lives took them to college and jobs in other cities, he continued to come over for weekly dinners and saw the kids every time they were in town. It was over these last few years that my dad decided to ditch his reserved, quiet demeanor and took on a sarcastic, dry sense of humor and a what the heck attitude, saying whatever was on his mind, even if it was inappropriate. It made for some funny and sometimes shh, grandpa moments, but these were the times that I felt my dad's personality really shined. His mind never missed a beat. When cheering at Jill and Jessica's softball games, he would sit right next to the dugout always, and he hilariously would criticize a fast group of players just loud enough for everyone to hear. And if you told him how much money something cost or how much they were making, he would spout off all kinds of calculations about it. He was quite the character. If he didn't like the food you made, he didn't hesitate to let you know it. I put up with his stubbornness of not eating anything chicken or pork, except, of course, bacon, which he insisted wasn't pork. He would be perfectly content just eating a good steak, burger, or fries. And oh, when we were at a restaurant, he would ask the waitress, "What do you got that's diet?" I will miss cooking my homemade clam chowder for him on Thanksgiving and my mom's latkes, and I know Dave will miss making him Rubens. These things he never complained about. One of the last times he was able to come over for dinner pre-COVID, Jake was in town and made a French dip sandwich that he literally gushed over. These last few years, my dad relied heavily on us, and even though at times he gave us a hard time, we know he loved and appreciated us. What I would do to hear his deep, gravelly voice right now, giving me and Dave a hard time about something. These last few months, COVID kept us mostly apart, and only recently have we been able to do porch visits with him. Being away from him has been the worst part about this pandemic. I hated that he was stuck in his room, but he kept his spirits up and he did what he knew he had to do. When I got the dreaded phone call last week, Dave and I rushed over to see him one last time. I entered his room for the first time since mid-March and saw him lying peacefully in his bed. I no longer needed to stay 6 feet apart, and I kissed him on the forehead. It makes me so happy that he is now reunited with my mom after 10 years of missing her so much, and he can now move with no pain. That he can do what he wants when he wants. Dad, you can eat all the junk food and drink all the soda that you want without me getting on you about it. And you can listen to Harper Valley PTA and Johnny Cash on repeat. And you know, you might even hear me play Harper Valley PTA on repeat. I love you, Dad.
Al? Yeah.
Yeah. He's from
That's where her. Yeah.
Well, I'm not gonna say.
Yeah, we can go walk just over the graph on the tab. Yeah, right here. Straight direct.
Do you want to go to I'll wait here, okay?
Let's go look at other graves.
They went to their parents' grave. They need to come back. Wow. Wow. That's great.
Nixon of David Shabbat, Khatiba, Art Adonai, Adonai, Hotel, Khatiba, Allah. I'm a David, protect me, O God, for I am not refugees. He said to God, you're my master, I don't claim to your benefit. Joshua Hashem, Ba'ara, Tima, Badir, Khatiba. You as Bosa Machem, Mahor, Ba'altis, the scared be done, for Estes, the Shmol stuff, for the sake of the holy ones who are interred in the earth and for the mighty, all my desires are fulfilled. That's what that. Their sorrows will increase, those who rush after their God, they will not put their publication or carry their anger on their lips. Adonai Merashoti, the Kosia thought of this week. What is my allotted portion and my share? The God they destined. Kabola no believe on even Asachor Shafa alive. Portions have fallen to me in pleasant places, even inheritance people. Avarechas Adonai Shiyotani, Apoeos Bisuni Chiyosoi. A blessed Almighty was advised me, also the nights, the only people like instructs. Shivisi Adonai Benagisa Kimini Bal Amot, the Haid Sanat Libre Beatel Kabot. After so Yishkam Latata. I've set the Almighty before me all time, because He's at my right hand and I will not falter. But there's these in my heart and choices, and my soul is degraded. My flesh too rests in confidence. Rosaza of Nashi Rishol was seated Hasik Kuros Shacha. But Yeni Orachayim Somas Machas of Panecha, Nimos Yikar. Will not abandon my soul to the grave, will not allow you to back onto its destruction. Will take note of the path of life, fullness of joy in your present, the delights that are in your right hand for an eternity. The Kaddish.
That was referring to a house. Rose. You ask friends to make rose for the family. Right here.